Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Alice from TUC Education. Today we are talking about organising during coronavirus and how we work collectively to protect workers' health, jobs and livelihoods during this time. Today we're joined by Dave McCrossen, who's Deputy General Secretary at USDAW, and Roger McKenzie, who's Assistant General Secretary at UNISON. And they're going to be talking a bit about some of the examples of where the movement's been winning so far, and what they and their unions have been doing since the outbreak of the crisis. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have some time to take some of your questions. The whole webinar will be about 45 minutes in total. So firstly, Dave and Roger, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Welcome. Before we start, just to let you know, on the side of your screen, you should see a chat bar where you can say hi and kind of what union you're from and share tips with other people. We'll be posting resources in the chat today as well. And if you've got anything you want to share with other webinar attendees, please feel free to post it here. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button called Ask a Question. So if you do want to pose a question to Dave or Roger today, please put them in there. We've got a lot of people signed up today, so we probably won't have time to get through all of the questions, but we will do our best, and any that we don't get to, we'll be using to inform kind of content that we're publishing in the future for reps. Just another comment as well. Fortunately, the live version doesn't have subtitles on, but our recorded version on YouTube will have subtitles in the future. Right, before we go to Dave and Roger and do the Q&A, I'm just going to run through some of the tips that the TUC has published on organising through lockdown and on facility time for furloughed reps, which we have been getting some questions about. So tip number one is keep in touch, which sounds really obvious. We can't all be in the same room as each other right now, but it's absolutely vital that we keep communicating with each other and reps with their members. The first thing we're recommending is checking if your branch or union has published any guidance on how to be communicating with your members right now. That's the kind of first point of call to check for any guidance. We would recommend at this time you're using all of your communications with people to find out what people's main concerns are. Also ask them what they think would help solve their problems right now, what would be their solutions. And talk to people about what other people are experiencing. Chances are a lot of us are struggling with the same issues right now. We also really want to emphasize that it's really important to speak to those people who are not part of a union right now. They will also need support in your workplaces, but hopefully the reasons for joining the union are kind of clearer than ever right now. We did a webinar on how to have a one-to-one conversation about joining a union a few months ago, obviously before this crisis, but it will hopefully have a lot of tips in it that you can still use. We'll post a link to it in the chat and we can send that out afterwards as well. It's just on the TUC Education YouTube channel. So obviously a lot of us are not meeting our colleagues face to face right now, so it poses challenges about how we have these conversations and how we communicate with people. A lot of you will already be using them with your colleagues, your friends, your family, but there are a lot of different digital platforms that we can use. So WhatsApp groups, Zoom calls, Facebook groups, and kind of throwing up actually huge benefits that we can take from them. If you're quite new to using these digital platforms, which I know some reps might be, some kind of simple tips are to think about the aim of the communication before choosing which tool you're going to use. With organising, we'd obviously emphasise having face-to-face conversations all the time. So if it is something that you would normally have a one-to-one face-to-face conversation, we'd recommend, for example, using a video call platform so you can see each other rather than, for example, a WhatsApp message or a Facebook group. If you are setting up WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups right now, we would recommend you set clear guidance on what they're for, so people know what the group is for and what they should post there to keep people focused on the actions that you want them to take and the discussions you want them to have rather than getting sidetracked. If You might also be concerned that if workers are working from home or furloughed right now, chances are that you might not have everyone's contact details. Some people might be off work emails, so we'd recommend making sure that you check that you need to gather any additional contact details for people. But please make sure you're adhering to GDPR when you do this, and you've got consent to collect people's details and send them the information you're going to be sending them. When having all these conversations, it might be a really good opportunity to start mapping the impacts of the crisis on your members and other people in your workplace. We'll also send out some resources about kind of how to map that we've developed before that should hopefully be quite useful. So essentially, no matter how big your workplace is, whether your union is recognised or not, please keep talking to people and having your union meetings. Everyone has something to negotiate for right now, and that's really important. Broad point number 2 is kind of check your rights. So please make sure you're checking your contracts and your staff handbooks, all the guidance put out by your unions and the government, and make sure that anyone who's working from home or furloughed has access to things like their contracts and staff handbooks. Sometimes these can be physically stored in workplaces, so we need to make sure we've got them now. These are a good place to start for anyone who's got questions about working from home, sickness, anything like that. When kind of doing this audit of contracts and staff handbooks, make sure you include any agency workers you've got. Chances are they might have very different terms and conditions to other workers in your workplace. And obviously, if you think your employer is in breach of your contract, contact your union's legal team as soon as you can to get some advice. The third broad point is kind of, even though we might not be with our employers right now in a kind of physical environment, demand that you're being consulted, and we can still take action if we don't agree. If your employer is drawing up policies in response to coronavirus, make sure they're speaking to you as the rep in the workplace, and keep lines of communication with your management open at the moment. It's really easy for people to get isolated, but make sure everyone's being kept in the loop in terms of the communication that's happening. Employers also do have legal duties to consult established health and safety reps and committees, so bear that in mind. And even if we're working in different environments, we can still take action if we don't agree with what our employer is doing right now, or not doing it in some cases. We've seen a number of different kind of public and collective tactics being used by different unions at the moment that are really having an impact. So, for example, you might choose to assert public pressure on your employer. Campaigns like Boycott Wetherspoons, run by Bakers members, or Shut the Sites by Unite activists, can threaten kind of reputational damage of businesses and force them to do a U-turn on any actions. And we've seen this happen already. We've also seen workers walk off the job over safety concerns. So in Ireland, nearly 1,000 union members walked off a food production site protesting lack of safety measures. Another tactic we've also seen used is kind of open letters and petitions, which you might have used in your workplaces before. Obviously, we can't speak to people in person to gather signatures, but you can be gathering digital signatures. And it can be quite nice if you get people to submit a picture of themselves as a way of signing a petition. That could be quite a nice visual way of getting your demands to your employer. Thinking about all these different tactics, you'll obviously have some questions that you need to think about before deciding which tactic you would use. For example, think about what your demands are. Each of us will have different issues right now. Some of it might be more PPE. For some people, it might be enforcing social distancing in their workplace. For others, it might be trying to get your employer to pay the additional 20% if they're being furloughed. Also think about who has the power to make this change in your workplace. And also think about what your employer cares about most. So if it's their public image, a more public action might make more sense, or if it's a bottleneck in production, something else might be better. Also, some other things to think about are enough people ready to do it? And is it simple enough for people to take part at this time? Obviously, people have got increasing pressures on their time, sometimes with caring responsibilities, and we're all working in different environments. Finally, just have a think about how management will react to different tactics and kind of plan for these responses. If you are planning on taking any action, your union can advise you on the best way to go ahead and how to escalate it if it is necessary. We'd also just make sure, once you know what your demand is, just make sure you understand your rights around those demands. Unions and the TUC as well have been putting together huge amounts of information about the wage subsidy scheme, kind of health and safety, parental care. So make sure you've accessed all of these to understand your rights around the demands that you've got. Right, the kind of final fourth point that I just wanted to make was we've had a number of questions about if reps are furloughed and their facility time. So the general rules of furloughing under the job retention scheme are that the government stipulates you cannot work, and that includes providing a service or generating revenue for an organisation. But a furloughed worker can volunteer or take part in training. Separate to that, there are obviously kind of set guidance around union reps facility time anyway. So the ACAS Code of Practice states that union reps of an independent trade union recognised by their employer are permitted to reasonable paid time off during working hours to carry out trade union duties, and that is a legal right. They are also permitted to reasonable time off during working hours to carry out certain trade union activities, but this is not a legal right. There is no legal right to paid time off for activities. And the difference between those is, for example, duties would include things like working around terms and conditions of employment, physical working conditions, redundancy, dismissals, disciplinary and grievances, whereas activities might include things attending like a union conference, your branch meeting, your regional meeting. However, some reps will have negotiated and unions will have negotiated for activities to be included in recognition and facility agreements. So if you're unsure about that, check any agreements you've got with your employer, or you can contact your full-time official to ask. So based on the kind of rules around the job retention scheme and existing codes of practices around facility time, the TUC advice is there's no reason that furloughed reps should not be able to continue with their union duties. This is because they're working on behalf of the union and not providing a service or generating revenue for their employer. Members also have a right to be represented by a union in disciplinary and grievance, and reps are accredited by their union to do this. So reps are kind of well covered in this aspect of their work. We also believe that because reps are volunteers, they're covered to carry out duties, activities and training under the terms of the wage subsidy scheme, as it does say furloughed workers can take part in volunteering work and training. I would just say, though, that this is obviously a new area for everyone. We're all working in incredibly new environments now, and this hasn't been tested yet. So if you are a furloughed worker, you should a furloughed rep, sorry, make sure you contact your union and check any agreements that you've got with your employer and your employment contract, which might have some information as well. We have created a piece of e-learning which kind of covers this guidance on facility time and furloughed reps and some of the other points that I've run through, which hopefully will be posted in the chat now, and we can email out after the webinar as well. So that's all written down as well. That are the kind of main points from me. So if we turn now to Dave and Roger to share some of the work that they've been doing, I guess the first question we would have for you, Dave and Roger, is have you got any advice for any kind of reps at the moment who have been furloughed and access to facility time?
Do you want to kick off,
Dave?
Roger?
Oh, yeah, Roger.
Well, look, I think there's two areas. So those who've been furloughed, we, like you, believe these are people that are acting as volunteers. So there shouldn't be any difficulties. If there is, we would hope they would report those back to us and we will challenge them in the appropriate way. In terms of the agreements that we have, where people are working normally, I think there's undoubtedly going to be pressure on facility time. We see that as a normal. So again, if that happens, it's important that people feed that back to the union. And again, we'll raise that with the businesses, either locally or nationally, whichever's most appropriate.
Roger, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm having real trouble hearing this at the moment. I mean, hopefully people can hear me, but I mean, frankly, I'm kind of surprised that there's any issue about people being able to do their jobs as trade unionists in these sort of times. And the bottom line for lots of our members is that loads of our members are being put in harm's way at the moment. I mean, of course, they're going to need to have their union reps near them and to be able to give them some advice and go and speak to management on their behalf. So, I mean, I think it was the Chancellor. And I'm not fond of quoting Tory ministers at all, but I think it was the Chancellor who said something about these being extraordinary times and we have to look at things differently. Something like that, he said. Well, I mean, if what's happening at the moment doesn't quite fulfil the exact letter of the law, well, tough. Basically, people need their trade unions at the moment and to be there for them in the workplace.
Great, thanks, Roger. And don't worry, we can hear you fine. And if you need me to repeat anything, just let me know if you're having troubles hearing either of us. Thank you both for that. That's really helpful advice. And I think now we'll go to kind of talking a bit about what you guys have been doing in your unions in the last couple of weeks. So Dave, if you just wanted to tell us a bit about the negotiations you've been having for retail workers and the kind of wins that you've secured for shop workers right now.
Well, first of all, I think it's fantastic that there is some form of real recognition around how vital our members are, and this would apply right across the piece. Unfortunately, that recognition doesn't always get reflected in terms of pay and conditions, nor does it in terms of the way our members are being treated by members of the public who still insist on being abusive to them. And equally with management who often decide that the rules that are going to be followed are the ones that they're implemented. So our challenges continue to be very similar to what they've always been. But one of the things that we have tried to do is to encourage businesses to recognise these unique times, and a number of businesses have stepped up in many respects. So if you take Tesco, Ocado, Sainsbury's, Argos and a few others, they've agreed to pay their staff a 10% bonus. That's great as far as it goes, but obviously we would be looking for the longer term as well as an immediate response to the challenges that lie there now. We've seen lesser employers like Poundland, for example, who have given their staff a double discount, a business that probably doesn't make an awful lot of money, so their ability to be flexible is fairly limited. The Co-op, and Morrison's, who've improved the bonus that people are going to get. But I think the problem with bonuses is that they are the promise of jam tomorrow rather than a regular income that people can actually live upon. We've also done some stuff around the sick pay with employers. There's a number of employers now sick on having working days before people can claim sick pay. So that should be implemented from day one, and we've had a number of successes there. We still have a problem with employers who have furloughed their workers. I don't think it's much to ask that where 80% of this money is being paid by the government, for an employer to do the decent thing, the right thing, and top those wages up. So I think we've still got some work to do on that. We've seen also some improvements in terms of PPE. We as a union have been campaigning for many years to see our members better protected at work. So seeing things like perspex screens on checkouts, on cigarette kiosks, for example, are actually long overdue and things that we've been arguing for a long time. It's a shame that we live in a society where people have to feel that they need that kind of protection in front of them, but that's the reality of it, and we're going to make sure that those things are part of our agenda going forward when we talk about freedom from fear, for example. I think the other thing that is worth mentioning, and I've seen from some of the comments that are coming up on the side, I would hope that any of our members, and especially our reps, if they have any difficulties at work, they should be in touch with us straight away. all of our regional officials have been told that they should, as a matter of course, be making regular contact with their reps, even more so at this particular time, whether that's via phone or by various other forms of social media.
Great, Dave, thank you. And I think that's a really important point at the end, that if you are having any issues at all, you should make sure you're getting in contact with your union kind of as soon as possible. They're here to support you right now. And I just wanted to reiterate what Dave said at the beginning as well. Shop workers are doing amazing work at the moment under extraordinary amounts of pressure to kind of provide these essential key services. And I was just wondering, Dave, as well, kind of looking beyond coronavirus, have you managed to secure any wins right now, kind of for the future when we're thinking this crisis might be at least deteriorating, moving to when it might be over?
Yes, we would always try to do that. It sounds quite callous, but I think we have to try and take advantage of every situation that presents us with. That's what trade unions have always done, organising around issues. So some companies have been a little bit easier to deal with. The Co-op have given all of their staff an additional day's holiday once this is over. Poundland have gone a stage further, giving everybody a full week's holiday, which would be welcome as well. So I think we've still got a lot of work to do, but we'll try to use those businesses that have been proactive as an example to those others. And the introduction, you talked about sharing that stuff via social media and campaigning. I think we can be more vocal than we are currently. And one thing that has been clear over this is that trade union profiles have been raised dramatically, and we need to make sure that that's maintained going forward. And ultimately that will come down to people joining, campaigning at a local level, and raising issues of concern in whatever way they can do.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that the kind of profile of unions has definitely been raised in the last few weeks. And as well as kind of using public pressure to shame your employers, it's important that we share and to celebrate our wins and successes, so people can see kind of all the amazing things that are going on at the moment and kind of in response to this crisis. And just a kind of final question for you, Dave, what advice would you give to reps right now who are trying to organise in quite new and challenging environments?
Well, I think the first piece of advice would be one that I'd always hope that people have with them. That's challenge. So when you see something that doesn't feel right, challenge it. If it doesn't follow procedure and process, because we know that companies often decide that the rules can go to one side because they're driven by getting the business through the doors. So challenging is really key. And where people, again, have issues with that, come on to us, let us know. It is important that feedback is a regular feedback, and that we're not just finding out about things either through social media or when it hits a major point. And the real change ultimately comes from the bottom up. It isn't a question about what unions do nationally. It's about the members highlighting what the concerns are and making us step up and do more. And we're willing to do that all of the time. The other thing, which I think is the most important point at this time, is to make sure you stay safe. Because there are so many people coming down because of government failures to provide PPE and to act quickly enough. And we're still seeing our members subject to physical and verbal abuse in the workplace. So I'd urge anybody that goes into a shop, treat shop workers with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. And where that's not happening, make sure the company are aware of it. We would expect them to be banning people as a minimum from stores. Prosecutions should follow as well. But it's important that, again, that's fed back to us so that we can actually capture the size of the problem in front of us and take appropriate action.
Fantastic. I think that's a really important point. We should all, I assume everyone on this webinar would be treating shop workers with respect. And I think one of the questions we've had is in the Ask Question section is around management still taking the side of customers who are abusing staff members in retail right now, which is completely unacceptable.
It's shocking. I don't, there's no other answer for it. I've never failed to understand where the philosophy of the customer is always being right, always at the cost of our members, underpaid and often far too overworked members. It's about time that businesses realise this shouldn't be profit at any cost. People need to be treated with dignity and respect. And that isn't just shop workers, it's postal workers, it's the people that are still collecting our bins, the people that are working in the frontline services, bus drivers, tube drivers. Everybody should treat people with respect. And this isn't just about how I feel, this is about how we can all be stronger together. And that's part of the problem that we have with society at the moment. And that's encouraged from the top down. And that's why trade unions are more important today than they probably ever been. And that isn't going to change at the end of this crisis.
Very well said, I think. Sorry, we're just having a few issues getting Roger back on the screen right now, but hopefully he'll be able to join us in a second. And it's really great to see everyone in the chat kind of sharing their experiences, and a lot of people saying, well said, Dave. So yeah, I completely agree. Fantastic.
Well, Roger, can I just say, and I think you covered this at the outset, but look, these are surreal times for everybody. We could never, if you'd written this 3 months ago, people would have laughed and said it was too far-fetched. So we aren't always going to get things right, and that's unacceptable. But we are doing our best to adapt to a really difficult situation. So we've asked all of our officials to maintain regular contact with the reps, and we would hope that the reps would be getting that. If they're not, or if there's additional support that's needed, either make contact with your local office or email me directly, and I'll make sure that somebody responds to you. But we're doing our best in these really difficult times. I'm incredibly grateful to all of our reps, and I'd say every rep throughout the trade union movement, to do the job that you do at any time is often a thankless task. At this particular moment, with everything else, whether it's around concerns around family or how you're even going to pay your bills, you're really stepping up in a way that I think we couldn't have comprehended. So thank you, sincerely thank you on behalf of my union, and keep doing it.
Yeah, I'd like to second that as well. I think it's been amazing to see how everyone has stepped up in this crisis, and the amazing work that reps and members and unions and everyone's been doing. And I'm sure Roger would say exactly the same thing if we were able to get him on the screen. Just while we're waiting for Roger to come back on there, Dave, do you mind if we move to some of the questions? See if we can start working through some of them. So one of the questions that we've had is actually a health and safety related question. So we can go through some of these, but obviously I would just clarify to people watching that we have had specific health and safety webinars in the past, and we're having some in the future as well. So we might address some of these, but also leave them for our next webinar when we'll have our kind of health and safety policy experts on. But one question, Dave, would be, someone's asked, have you got any tips for repping people through a disciplinary process via conference call? Julie says she's done one so far, but she found it quite odd and it felt quite flat and clinical. So I don't know if you've got any advice on that.
Well, it does feel quite flat, doesn't it? This is a strange situation. It's not often I'm chatting to people from my kitchen, and I cleaned specially for the occasion. I think try to prepare in the normal way. Think about the issues that are in front of you, and try to make the point as forcibly as you can. It's an employer. Oh, Roger's back. It's going to be easier for an employer, I think, to try and hide behind the screen and not connect in a meaningful way and not necessarily respond. But all you can do is push your points in the normal way, pursue the argument as strongly as you can. And if all else fails, we'll look to the next stage of the procedures where we can address things then.
That's great. Thank you, Dave. Roger, can you hear us? Great to have you back.
I can't hear you very well. Can people hear me?
Yes,
okay?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Can people hear me?
Yep.
All right. So, well, shall I just talk and just kind of carry on until you wave at me or something, in the hope that people can actually hear me? Is that okay?
Yes. So I think we're having a bit where Roger can hear us.
I mean, my right. I mean, my kind of bottom line on organising always is that it's got to be based in the reality that people are going through at the moment, and the biggest reality that's going through a lot of our members' lives at the minute is that they're being put in harm's way by this government. And we have to recognise that, because that's the biggest organising challenge for us, is that you have to base your organising on what are the real concerns that are facing people in the workplace at that particular time. And the fact is, our members, workers in the care sector, do care situations and being deliberately put in the way of harm. And that's what we have to try and organise around. So basically what we have to do is to try and deal with that as an issue. We have to find a way of making sure that the employer deals with their basic responsibility for anybody who goes to work, and that is to make sure that they are safe in that workplace. But it's more than that on this occasion. It's not just about people keeping people safe, it's about keeping people alive. And our members are doing this sort of job because they have that kind of vocation, but also they're doing it so that they can put bread on the table for their families and keep a roof over their heads. So when employers start to threaten our members, as they have done, start saying to some of our members, you must sleep in at some of these care homes, and our members are looking at this and saying, well, what sort of choice have we got in this sort of situation? Well, I mean, what we're saying to our members, if you don't feel safe, then do what you normally do in that sort of situation. You wouldn't generally go into an unsafe working environment. Now, that's easy to say, and that's easy for me sitting in my room here, to somebody who's then going to be worried about whether or not they're going to get paid, and worried what sort of attitude that they're going to get from their employer. And this has happened to a relative of mine who's been basically instructed by an employer in the private sector and care home to come in and to sleep in for 2 or 3 days or whatever it is, 2 or 3 nights, whatever it is. And we've got to deal with this as a trade union movement, and it's not just a bargaining issue. The point I really want to make is that bargaining issues are also organising issues, because the organising imperative for us is to build a movement that's strong enough so that governments like this and employers like many of the ones our members are facing don't feel as though they can get away with this sort of rubbish and treating our members in the way that they are doing. So we have to make sure that we've got not just advice and support that people can access, and that's really important, of course it is, but we must also go about trying to make sure that we are building that collective so that people can actually talk to each other, learn from each other, but also build the power within that workplace, not just for the situation that people are in now, but for what's coming after as well. And a lot of the work that our members, our organisers are doing at the minute is, yes, dealing with what's happening now on the ground and trying to do the best they can, given that you can't get access to a lot of these workplaces for obvious reasons, personal access to a lot of these workplaces, but looking for how we can make sure we can build for something stronger afterwards as well. I want to go back to the point that I made about not having the personal protective equipment, because I do think it is really, really important. We've got a kind of hotline in inverted commas that we've set up to try and get some stories from our members about some of the things that they're experiencing. Again, from an organising perspective, this isn't just about collecting information so that we can pass it on to government or some employers somewhere. This is about how we can use this information to help build power for those members in those workplaces as well. And for me, that is absolutely critical as part of this. And some of the stories that we're getting, you know, I mean, wouldn't be far-fetched from a kind of Victorian drama, actually, and people being told to, you know, reuse protective equipment. You know, people, you know, where people have been sick into their protective equipment, being told to reuse it. You know, I mean, this is the sort of thing that's going on. But also, one of the other things, and I do want to make this point, is that a lot of our organisers, a lot of our activists are going through things that they've never had to go through before, and where they're dealing literally with life and death situations, where they are trying to talk to families in hospitals, so as members who are working in hospitals, because obviously the families of people who are in care and in their care are not able to go in and visit them, and when they die, a lot of our members are the ones who are having to ring up families, and now some of them would have had experience of that, but loads of them wouldn't. Loads of our activists are also having to deal with many of our members who are in those sort of situations, and are and again, it's a kind of it's a new situation for them. So we're trying to find ways of making sure that we get the support to not just our staff, so that our staff who've never had to deal with these things before get the advice, get the counselling, get the support that they need as well. But also that our activists and our members on the ground every day who are in these workplaces, that they get the support as well. And for me, that is, and I just want to reiterate the point before I close. These aren't just bargaining issues. These are organising issues, because it's all about building strength and power for our members in those workplaces. The reason that many of these employers are able to get away with this sort of behaviour against our members is because in lots of places we're not strong enough. Or actually, even where we're strong enough in a lot of these workplaces, they feel that they can get away with it because of the general situation that we're in right now. We have to be their voice in saying that this is unacceptable, and these kind of false promises that we keep getting from the government about, oh, well, we're going to provide more protective equipment for people tomorrow and there'll be more the day after and all this sort of stuff. We have to nail this rubbish. They are lying to people, and we have to say enough is enough, and our members need this personal protective equipment, and they need it now. Their lives are at risk because of it.
Thank you, Roger. I think some really powerful and important points there, especially about building strength and power in our workplaces, and that's essential right now, and also looking to the future, kind of once coronavirus is over, hopefully. And I think some of the things you've said there are really shocking in terms of the way that our care workers and our health workers are being treated right now, and it's appalling. Just another question, if you can hear us, Roger, was just what advice that you would give to reps right now who are trying to organise and trying to win for their members, just kind of 2 top bits of advice.
I think because of the situation we're in, I think people will just try and deal with stuff on their own quite often, and I think we need to try and keep people working as a collective. Now, I know that that's difficult, and I've seen a lot of the comments that have been made and all of that, and some of the difficulties that we've got, and I think my experience in this meetings kind of even underlines for me the difficulty that we've got about getting the sort of platforms in place that everybody can use and that everybody can access. But also we have to remember that there's a lot of people who are busy saving lives at the minute and are not really particularly interested in meetings. But I think we need to find platforms so that people can actually talk with each other across our union and also across trade unions as well about the experiences they're getting. One point I'll make as well, perhaps on the same issue, is that I think over the years there's been a lot of unnecessary competition between unions, and I think that it's been the bane of organising, frankly. I I think if we can't work together across the trade union movement around this particular issue to help build the trade union movement, obviously I'm concerned about building UNISON as a trade union, but we should be working with each other to make sure that we build power for working people in their workplaces. We only do that if we can work across each other, across the movement as well. So one of the other things I'd suggest is that we need to cooperate across the movement as well. So with that, I particularly want to thank the TUC for all the work that you've done in not only doing this in organising this seminar, but also for all the work that you've done in trying to make sure there's really good dialogue across the trade union movement at the moment.
Well said, Roger. I think that's a really important point. And thank you for all of that. It was really interesting and really great to hear. We've got about 5 minutes left on the webinar, so we'll just go to some of the questions that have been coming in. So we've had a question from Sarah James at GMB, who's asked if either of you have got any tips for reaching out to non-members whilst working from home. So I don't know if Roger, if you've got any tips on that.
I couldn't hear.
Sorry, I'll repeat it. So the question was, do you have any tips for reaching out to non-members whilst we're working from home?
Sorry, I just can't hear. Sorry.
I'll pass it to Dave for now, and then hopefully we'll get back to you in a second. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, I think sometimes social media can be a positive tool. So talking about your personal experiences, the wins that we make, because we don't talk enough about the wins that we have, which are every single day. Thinking about the things that we can actually physically campaign around as well. So getting people talking about the benefits of joining a trading union. And Roger touched on a number of those. And I think the biggest point that's out there, and it's a refreshing moment at this particular moment in time, is how unions are working far better together. We're not in competition. When we try to compete with each other, two groups of people benefit, the employers and government. The stronger we are is going to only come from the basis of us working together and identifying the things that we have in common. So I think in terms of that, having conversations with people, putting stuff out on social media, being positive about stuff, because there's so much to be negative about. But if you have a problem, think of a solution. And that's where I think we can build a stronger movement under the auspices of the TUC, which is bringing all of that good work together.
Brilliant. I'm not sure if Roger can hear us now, but another question we've had is from a member who says, I'm flexibly retired, so only have 17.5 hours working time per week. I'm also classed as a key worker and working from home. And they've just asked if you've got any recommendations on how they should be obtaining and recording time spent on union duties right now.
I think it's just simply log it. I think the trouble is, if we don't make a note of things as we go along, and I'm the world's worst, I scribble everything down in a pad. I think it's important that you just note it down at that particular moment, and then you can easier look back and realise probably you've done more than 17.5 hours and some. So just keeping a diary note as you go along.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I'd also add, if your workplace, if your employer has a timesheet that they use and you've got an electronic version of that, it's always handy to do it in a format that they'll be familiar with. Another question on the issue of kind of furloughing reps. So one member has asked, should reps be furloughed when there are still substantial amounts of colleagues at work? This effectively means they're not able to work yet, and I know that in the current environment I'm supporting members more than ever. In fact, up to 6 hours per day, so almost a whole full working day working on their rep duties. So I guess the question is, do you think reps should be furloughed while other members of staff are still at work?
Well, there's not going to be a stock answer to this because it does depend on the circumstances, but it wouldn't surprise me if certain employers were deliberately furloughing our reps just to get them out of the workplace so that they can actually get on without having to worry about health and safety and people doing the job properly along lines like social distancing. So if those things are happening, I think it's important to have a conversation with your trade union to see whether things done have been properly and whether it's appropriate. But a simple answer would be no. If people are working, I'd expect our reps to be at work as well.
Yeah. I think that's very well said. And I would just say, as we reiterated before, we don't believe there's any reason now why a furloughed rep wouldn't be able to carry on doing their duties. But as Dave said, if you think that employers are purposefully furloughing reps because of this, contact your union straight away. I'm just looking through some of the questions that we've had. Just a question in general to both of you about kind of what your trade unions have been doing to protect workers in the gig economy and agency workers, and how we can ensure that these workers are protected at the moment.
Well, from our perspective, we have a huge problem right across all of the sectors we were organised within, but that's particularly true, I think, in the distribution side of things. We've issued a press release today concerning DHL, who do lots of work with companies like M&S, Tesco's and others, who are refusing to pay people properly, who aren't allowing people to go off sick because they're only going to have to rely on SSP, and nobody can live on SSP. I'd love to see Matt Hancock and a few of his chums try to do that for a little while. So we have a huge problem, and where it suits the employer, whether it's a gig employer, in kind of economy side of it, getting a bit of feedback, sorry. Or people who are these kind of fake self-employed and via agencies. It's even more relevant trying to get people to join trade unions there and gaining a collective voice. But it's far from easy. We've seen the campaign that GMB have been running for years in Amazon. We've been doing the same in the likes of Lidl and Aldi. And I'd say to people, look, if there's an employer out there who refuses to recognise a trade union, refuses to engage properly with their staff, vote with your feet. You know, there is no way that any employer who has nothing to hide should be fearful of a trade union. If they treat people with dignity and respect, if they pay people a decent living wage, which isn't the current living wage, they won't have a problem with us. But the reason they avoid us is because they've got something to hide, and that's quite clear.
Thank you. I think we've just got time for one final question now. We've had a question from someone who works in the Argos hub in a Sainsbury's, and they are covering for a rep that's off sick at the moment. And they just wanted any advice on, they're feeling slightly out of their depth. They're in a store where they're not normally the rep. They're trying to keep in contact with the usual rep via text and calls. But any advice on how to deal with this situation? I think this raises quite an important point, that there obviously is a high chance at the moment that reps will be off sick. So what to do in the instance when, if there is only one rep in your workplace and they're off sick, or if there are a few reps in your workplace and multiple are off at the same time?
Well, as I said earlier, certainly from USDAW's perspective, I'd expect the regional officials to be making regular contact with all our reps, whether that's health and safety or whether it's a full-on shop steward. So if you're not getting that, or even if you are, you need some support and backup, and you know, sometimes we know the answers, but we just lack a bit of confidence in actually challenging, then pick up the phone and contact. If you haven't had that response, if you are struggling to get hold of people, then either email me directly if you're an USDAW rep, and I'll make sure that you get somebody to respond, or people can contact me via Facebook. It's absolutely essential that we don't just talk about the support our reps need, we're shown to be actively there, backing them up 100%, as difficult as that is at this moment in time. So if people don't feel supported, I'm sorry for that, but we will improve as we go on. These are challenging times, I think, as Roger said earlier on as well.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think on that point, it also raises the issue of we're seeing in some unions an increase in members signing up, and some unions are also obviously trying to recruit reps at the moment. So if you are a member, I would really encourage you to sign up as a rep. We need you more than ever right now, and the role of the rep is so important and so valued. And just on a point of new reps, obviously training in the classroom is not going ahead, but hopefully your unions will be able to offer you some sort of alternative training right now, whether it be online or a kind of a different form of what they're able to offer in the classroom. Dave and Roger, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm really sorry, Roger, if you can hear us for the technical difficulties we've had, but your points were really important, and it's been great having you. As I said at the beginning, this has all been recorded, so if you have had any technical issues, you can watch the recording afterwards. It will be available here on Crowdcast straight away, and then on our YouTube channel afterwards, and we'll also email out all the resources that we've been talking about. Thank you so much again for joining us, and all the questions that you've asked will be used to inform any content going forward. And thanks again to Dave and Roger. It's been absolutely great having you with us today.
Pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. Our next webinar will be on the 28th of April, which is International Workers' Memorial Day, and that will be with our Health and Safety Policy Officer here at the TUC, Shelley Asquith. But thank you very much, and see you all soon.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.